feminism, Young says, seeks sexual equality. Therefore, we can see that humanist feminism is focusing on the fact that femininity is your weakness. That because you are inculcating the quality of femininity, you are weak, you are becoming a woman, etc. Now, this essay does not focus on that. It also delineates the gynocentric feminist side, and it says that gynocentric feminism does not focus its analysis on the barriers to women's self-development and the exclusion of women from the spheres of power, prestige, and creativity. Instead, gynocentric feminism focuses its critique on the values expressed in the dominant social spheres themselves. What is its focus all about? Its focus is, number one, on women's reproductive processes that keep us more linked with nature. So this is somewhere connected with ecofeminism, that women's reproductive organs keep you constantly in contact with nature. Just as a woman reproduces a baby, there are trees giving fruits. So it's how, it's keeping us linked with nature. So instead of considering, as per humanist feminism, that, it's dark is, feminine, and something that is bright and, scintillating, sunny, that is masculine, anything that is, weak is feminine. So it's not that. And stronger is masculine. Humanist feminism focuses much more on female power being weak, dark, and, not that bright. Something which needs to, like a creeper that needs support. But gynocentric criticism does not focus on that. Gynocentric criticism says, well, welcome to femininity. There is nothing wrong with femininity. It is not a problem. It is we who call it a problem. It seems like, transferred epithet. We call a television as an idiot box. It's not the television that's an idiot. It's we who are idiots who cannot, understand how to use television appropriately. It's the same way. Femininity is not an issue. It's not a problem. It's not wrong. It is we who call it wrong. Why? We'll see. The second point, it says that women are better at social cooperation and nurturing. This is what we see in most of the novels of Jane Austen, of Flora Thompson. Flora Thompson has delineated that beautifully in her series called La Cries to Candleford. La Cries to Candleford by Flora Thompson is an autobiographical series. And in that, various characters like Miss Lane, she allows her cousin, to send her firstborn, young Laura, to stay at the post office, and she trains the woman to become financially independent. So mutual cooperation, helping one another. Queenie is a fantastic character. And not just because she is coming up with various ideas to help her neighbors, that she is, she has her doors of mind open to, new things. She's flexible by nature. She's not a person who is rigid. She welcomes something that is new. But most importantly, she has also opened the doors of her house to those who are unsheltered or about to be unsheltered in the story. Especially the ones, Alfie and his brothers and sisters. Alfie's father, is on the ship, and Alfie's mother gets arrested because she cannot pay the debt. So Queenie, lets them into her house, and she doesn't have, number one, child of her own, but she takes on that liability, not because it is a responsibility as a neighbor, but she loves her neighbor. So all these, elements that are feminine are considered to be, or rather mocked at, and considered romantic. But there is no need to mock at them. We need to reread them, reinterpret them, because we need to analyze that they are not petty, they are not trivial. They are not only germane to the times that were back then, but also in the present times. Mutual cooperation, nurturing, all this is important. And that comes, naturally to women. It's intrinsic for them. Last point is femininity, like I said, and even Young emphasizes on that, and I support Young's point when she says that femininity is not a problem, but the source of our salvation. The next person that we need to talk about is Elaine Shawwalter. Elaine Shawwalter is an American literary critic, feminist, and writer on cultural and social issues. She is known for her contribution to gynocentric feminism. In fact, she's the person who has coined the term, gynocriticism in her essay Toward a Feminist Poetics. And she has decided to, and not only that, but she gives you an idea, or rather she wakes you up. Her essay is like an alarm bell, and she wakes you up to the understanding of the texts that have been written by Charlotte Bronte, that have been written by Jane Austen. And she says that all these novels that are based on an idyllic life, or that are based on the social fabric and how the female friendships and love affairs lead to the story, lead to the rather climax of the story. So all these things that she has talked about, all these things that Jane Austen has talked about or Bronte has talked about are not petty, are not trivial. But that is, possible, or we can open our eyes to the rather deeper, intense understanding of these texts only if we shift our perspective. And the new perspective that she calls is gynocriticism. Now, in the essay, there is a section entitled Gynocritics and the Female Culture. Shawwalter states very assertively that the program of Gynocritics is to construct a female network for the analysis of women's literature, to develop new models based on the study of female experience rather than to adapt to male models and theories. So she says there is no need to look at the texts written by women from the same point of view that you look at, you analyze the texts that are written by men. If their, biological categories are different, then their gender roles are bound to be different in society, and therefore their experiences within the society are going to be different. And that is going to color their writing. So why not analyze the respective texts written by them, keeping in mind their gender role in society, their experience in society, and perhaps then we might not become, such a big snob. We might not become, we might not become that superior as a critic and condescend the works written by women. Now, gynocritics, she says, gynocritics begin at the point when we free ourselves from the linear absolutes of male literary history. If we stop trying to fit women between the lines of male tradition and focus instead on the newly visible world of female culture. Now, gynocriticism is related to feminist research in history, anthropology, psychology, sociology, all of which have developed hypotheses of a female subculture, including not only the ascribed status and the internalized constructs of femininity, but also the occupations, interactions, and consciousness of women. Now, what does Shawwalter mean when she says all of this? Number one, we need to analyze all the, subsystems or the rubrics of epistemology, of what we call, intellectual ideologies. We need to, reread sociology. We need to reread our anthropology. We need to reinterpret the same text and see from a gynocritic perspective. And see if we can come up with something called female literary tradition rather than trying to fit the texts written by females into the male literary history. Why do we need to fit into something, when we are born to stand out? That's what I want to say, that we need to come up with, and of course, that's what Shawwalter is emphasizing on, that we need to come up with a different canon of literature called female literary culture. female literary history. Now, we need to move on to the point wherein she states that anthropologists study the female subculture in the relationships between women as mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. And what do they study when they study all of these relationships? They study in terms of sexuality, reproduction, and the ideas about their body and in the rites of initiation and passage, purification, ceremonies, myths, and taboos. We need to move on to the next person after Elaine Shawwalter, called Patricia Waugh, who, in her book, Literary Theory and Criticism, an Oxford Guide, says that the first tactic of gynocriticism is simple and potent. It worked to increase the number of female authors available to readers. So, you need to go back to analyze the canon of literary history and see if there were any female writers whose works were not published. Of course, their works were not published back then. They were not even allowed to publish, and that is why they chose to write under the pseudonym of a male. For example, George Sand, Madame George Sand, or George Eliot. Why did they choose the word George? Because otherwise, their literary works would not have been published. But then, that was that. What we need to keep in mind that gynocriticism focused, which is of course connected with gynocentrism, it focused on making readers aware and conscious of the fact that there are works written by women. Just because we haven't read them yet doesn't mean they never existed. They could have been in the form of epistles that were later brought to light as epistolary novels. But then just ignoring them and, avoiding them, not looking at them, overlooking them, considering petty letters would be highly incorrect on our part, of course. It, meaning gynocriticism, did this partly by encouraging, Waugh says, the emergence of new writers, and partly by recovering forgotten or unvalued texts by making them available for reassessment. Virago Press, at that time, of course, Virago Press, as you can see, it shows the spirit of feminism, the press, of course, was instructed in both these processes, that it has to publish the works written by, women and bring to light the works of women that were written in the past but are not available, have not been available to the readers till now, but they need to be made available to the readers now. So, Virago Press, though established in 1973, whose purpose was to publish only female authors, and in 1978 it published Antonia White's Frost in May, the first in the Virago Modern Classics series, which republished books by women that were no longer easily available. Shawwalter combined gynocentric readings of canonical female authors with an examination of unknown writers in an attempt to revolutionize accepted canon. So the accepted canon was the male literary history, the male literature canon. Now, when we talk about coming up with the canon of the literature, developed by females, we need to look at it, from historical point of view as well. Why? Because we need to state the females who have written the texts before, whose name has not been mentioned, whose name has not been in the light for quite a while. Very few of us know about Afra Ben, who has written Urunoko. But then she has written that, and we need to acknowledge that she was way before Jane Austen popularized social realistic novels about romantic affairs and female friendships and etc. Rural life, perhaps. By questioning the criteria, Waugh says, by which classic novels were defined, Shawwalter, like Kate Millett, helped to expose the artificiality and subjectivity of the seemingly objective value judgments. that surrounded literary analysis. Now, the re-emergence of novelists from previous decades helped to disprove the assumption that women had not been significantly engaged with literary production. Now, why was that so? Why were women not engaged with literary production? Was it that they were not writing anything? Of course they were writing. They were writing diaries. They were writing letters. They were writing journals. They were writing poems. They were writing essays. They were writing their reflections on what was happening around them. But were they encouraged to write? No, they wrote secretly. They wrote furtively. What was expected of them was, donning the gloves and all those things. Why so? The patriarchal society did not ever want them to, number one, read or write. Not as much as the men, of course. Read and write as much as you are allowed to. So that you do not, one fine day get the inspiration from the muses and start writing. But then, when you when you get enough education so as to express yourself, you can't prevent yourself from expressing. And that's what the women of that time do. It was not that the women did not engage in literary production. What they produced was not published, was not brought to light, was not accepted, was not considered as a text. And therefore, what is a person to do if the work written by you, no matter what, no matter how brilliant it seems, no matter how intense and deep it might seem, is rejected to be considered as, as a valuable text itself, valuable enough to be published, let's say. And the re-emergence, like I said, I will repeat the point that Patricia Waugh very firmly states in her book. The re-emergence of novelists from previous decades helped to disprove the assumption that women had not been significantly engaged with literary production. Women, it was shown, had written, and they had written in significant quantities, but nobody knew about it. Nobody was informed about it, because those texts were, number one, not considered as valuable texts, and if they were not considered valuable texts, then why to inform anybody about them? And therefore, even if they were valuable, nobody told another soul that this is a brilliant text, but this is written by a woman, and so on and so forth.